Someday, but not like this. Hell of a place for a nap, pal. I blinked up at the owner of the boot, nudging me in the ribs. He was frowning down at me from behind his scraggly beard, a cigarette between his lips. I muttered something unintelligible as I struggled to sit up, spilling what was left inside the bottle of whiskey onto my shirt. You know, I'm out here most nights. I get restless. Walking the rails seems to help a bit, the stranger said, sitting beside me on the tracks. Every now and again, I'll meet someone on my path. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the crickets chirp. The stranger leaned his head back and gazed up at the stars. You a musician? He asked. I glanced over at my guitar case and snorted. What gave it away? I slurred. Just a hunch. May I? I don't get the chance to play much these days. I shrugged at him. He took my indifference as an invitation and opened the case, pulling my ancient instrument from within. He held it in front of him, admiring the beautifully aged wood and whistling softly. I nodded my agreement while he gently strummed the nylon strings. So, Mary got you out here, did she? He pondered. How did you? I gasped. He tapped the neck of the guitar, and I couldn't help but laugh. I had carved her name into the wood years ago. Hey, I get it, buddy. Trust me, you aren't the first person to have his heart broken. No, it's not like that. She was the love of your life. Yes, but she was my daughter. The stranger stopped his strumming and looked at me somberly. I didn't realize, he murmured. I was surprised to see his eyes welling with tears. She was sick, and I was on the road. I thought she had more time. I was on the road when she passed away. So you want to see her again? The stranger put his hand on my shoulder, looking deep into my miserable eyes. Well, listen, pal. You will. Someday. But not like this. Not this way. With that, he began to play. From the first note I was weeping, haunted and bemused by the song he was performing. It was the one I had written for Mary, the day she was born. Beneath us, the rails began to rumble. On the horizon, I could see the engine barreling towards us. Yet the stranger played on. The train was only a few 100 meters away. By then, I was on my feet, jumping off the tracks and begging him to get up. The stranger reached the song's conclusion and handed the guitar over to me. She's always with you, friend. Remember that, will you? I fell away as the train closed the gap, my horrified scream the only thing that remained after the stranger and the train vanished into thin air. I used to be afraid. They told me I had an overactive imagination. I guess that happens when you're a small child, living in a vast, ancient home. Every time I called my parents to my room in the middle of the night, they had an explanation ready. The footsteps I heard on the stairs. It's just the house settling. Go back to sleep, dear. The whispers I heard coming from the other side of my room. That's just the wind outside, sweetie. my door slowly swinging open. "There's a draft in the house. No need to worry, darling." I did my best to feel reassured, but there was always a nagging doubt that prevented me from keeping my eyes closed at night. After a while, I began to see things that just couldn't be real, like the pair of eyes that watched me from the closet, or the decrepit old woman who walked through the hallways each night. I befriended a small girl who loved to play pranks on my mother and father. She would take things and put them in places they weren't apt to look. I would do my best to stifle my laughter as my father searched for his car keys or my mother looked for her slippers. Another specter was a young man who was dressed in fine clothing from another time. He would walk past me, give me a wink, and adjust his hat in the hallway mirrors. It became so frequent that I began to accept them. The terror I felt initially gave way to a sort of pride. I felt special, blessed to see what no one else could. One night, I awoke to my mattress shifting under the weight of someone sitting on the edge of my bed. Groggy but alarmed, I raised my head and gazed over at the figure sitting there. I let out a scream as I locked eyes with my father, gripping his chest and mouthing wordlessly, his bloodshot eyes desperate. I tried to help. I just didn't know how. He was gone before actual help arrived. I knew that he would soon join the parade of nightly visitors. Finally, I saw him walk by my room. Once he noticed me, his ashen face lit up. He sat on my bed the way he had the night he died, though this time we simply enjoyed each other's company. The years went on and on. As I grew into adulthood, my mother grew more distraught. She could not see my father the way that I could. Even when I led her right to him, she was blind to his presence. It hurt my soul to watch their forlorn attempts at communication. I guess it was no surprise when I found my mother wandering the house. Her face was blue, her neck was twisted at a horrible angle. But there was a smile on her face as she walked hand in hand with my father once more. Where there's a well, there's a way. I rubbed the old coin I'd brought with me between my fingers while I gazed down the well. As far as I knew, this might be my only chance, and I couldn't afford to squander it. It felt heavy as I flipped it. Everything seemed to move much slower than it should. The words leaving my lips sounded like they were spoken by a stranger. "I wish Dad had gone instead." The coin clinked against the walls, briefly, before falling silent. I held my breath, unsure of what to expect. After a long while of waiting, I frowned. Of course, wishes are for little children. I felt foolish for being so disappointed. Just as I was preparing to return the lid to the well, a voice called out from within. "I can grant your wish." Goosebumps covered my skin at the sound of it. It reminded me of dry leaves rustling and metal scraping together. Alarmed, I dropped the lid and fell backwards in my panic. I scrambled to get away while it continued. "I can grant your wish, dear boy, so long as you do something for me." I froze. Cautiously, I crawled back toward the well and pulled myself up to the opening. What? What do you want? I called down, my voice quivering. My stomach churned nervously all the way back to the house. I felt guilty for my wish. It was spiteful. It was selfish. But I missed her so much. And Dad had been different ever since Mom left. He was angrier. He was drunker. And nothing seemed to matter to him more than sitting in front of the TV. He was waiting for me the moment I went inside. What were you doing out there? I gulped. I hated when his eyes were glazed over like that. Just walking, I stammered. He squinted at me. Were you near the well? My heart pounded. Were you? I nodded. What have I told you? 1,000 times I've told you never go near it. He roared, backing me into a corner. I'm sorry. I wanted to make a wish. His expression immediately changed. Did you take the cover off? Yes. Without a moment's hesitation, he burst through the door, spewing profanity. I trailed behind while he stumbled toward the well. How many times did I say it? How many times? He asked, picking the lid off the ground. And you still couldn't. But his words were cut short by a skeletal hand emerging from the well and grabbing him by the collar. He let out a shriek and tried to thrash away before he was pulled in head first. His horrified scream cut short as he reached the bottom. I stood in shock, completely petrified as a withered corpse climbed out from the well. Even as decomposed as she was, I could still recognize my mother. Thank you, dearest, she rasped, taking my hand in her fleshless grip. We can go home now. I'll wait for you. I can remember when my husband first asked me. He was sitting across the couch from me, his legs wrapped around mine. What happens when we die? His words shook me out from the clouds of a daydream and sent me plummeting back to earth. What do you mean? Is all I could offer. To you and I, he continued, leaning forward and taking my hands. One of us is going to die before the other. What do we do then? I had no answer for him. The afterlife was something I'd never believed in. It just seemed so fantastical, like perfect little lies we're told to make death more bearable. All I could do was shrug and reply. Well, if it's me, he smiled, I'll wait for you. At his funeral, amidst the whispered condolences, I found his words fluttering back to me. I began to wonder if there was a chance they might hold any truth. It didn't take him long to make himself known. I was sitting down for breakfast, contemplating a life without him, when he first appeared. The steam from my mug wafted across the table, catching the rays of sunlight from the open window. As I watched, a familiar form began emerging from the steam, and in the fleeting moments before they disappeared into the ether, I saw his face. It didn't end there. Sometimes I'll wake up to a strange sensation, certain that someone is in the room with me. My eyes will eventually find a shadow, one that doesn't belong to this world. The moment I start to focus on it, something pulls at its edges, and it begins to dissolve. In the instant before it disappears, I'm almost certain I hear his voice, though the words are never clear. It always happens in moments like these, and though they crumble like ashes in the wind, he has shown me that his promise will stand the test of time. He is there, and he is waiting for me. How I wish that this was comforting. How I wish that the thought of an afterlife with my beloved husband could bring me anything but dread. When I killed him, I really thought it would be the end. I thought, at long last, I had rid myself of him. But I know now, with every day I spend away, I'm only drawing closer to an eternity with him. And when we finally meet again, I can only wonder if his embrace will be as tender.